Start the recording now. I am Teresa Gibson. Welcome this afternoon. Thank you for joining us again. It's good to see you all back. I am just going to get us rolling with a quick Zoom orientation. If you are just joining us for the first time, most of you were with us last week, so it's good to see you again. Today, if we do have you automatically muted as you're entering the room, but if there's any point where you're asked to jump on that microphone, you can feel free to unmute yourself. We left that power with you. And at any point in time, I will be the one monitoring the chat, so you can feel free to drop questions in as they arise for you. I will also be dropping some documents into the chat that Judy and Manley will be using throughout the session today. So I will, just after I stop talking, jump in there and get those documents ready for you to be able to access. And you can reach out to me via the chat privately or to the whole group if you think it's something that will benefit the whole group. If you have any technical issues, I am the person to reach out to. And with that, I will toss this over to our facilitators, Judy and Manley.
Okay, well, good afternoon. I'm going to go ahead and see if I can get this going, if I get the right one, this one, and go ahead and put it up. And I don't think that worked, so I'm sharing, but all right, I don't think that worked the way I wanted it to, so let me try again. There we go. And Manley and I both spent some time looking over what you sent in for your homework assignments. And a quick reminder to everybody, if you did not send them in, you're going to have a few more things to do for the next session. We can't give you the full 1.0 CEU credits unless we have those, because that completes the 10 hours that we're supposed to be having instead of just the 6 for the contact hours.
So better late than never is good. Even if it's late, send it in.
We'll take it late, and that way we can mark you off that we received it, because we do keep track of who we've received information back from and results from. So today, I think Manley's going to start off, and he's going to talk about the paper towel activity that you did, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about the topic and questions that you sent in, and a little bit more about developing the question and where we go from here. Because we're looking at we're going to really be getting into the progression of your guiding students and your modeling what your students would be experiencing along the way. So I'm going to pass it over to Manley.
Okay, thank you, Judy. First, I'd like to thank everybody who got their homework in. Remember, if you didn't, you can go ahead and send it in to get the credit, but it helps us if you send it in on time, just like if you're the classroom teacher, it helps if students do it on time. That way we can record it. You'll see some of the results today. We got a lot of the questions that people are going to ask later, and also your data that you have for your paper towel experiment. We have that, and that'll help us discuss it. So this was our challenge, our question: how much water will one towel of each type hold or absorb? Okay, let's see what we got on the next slide, Judy. Let's see. Okay, what we're going to look at and talk about for just a little while would be the data that you sent in, the methods that you used, and that's going to be really important because later today, Judy's going to talk about research plans, and those methods are pretty important. I'm going to talk about variables a little bit, and did we control all the variables we needed to control? We'll talk about that a little bit, and then also get into some conclusions that we might have had, or you might have had as a result of seeing all the data. Okay, so let's see what we got next. Should have some. Okay, we probably want to see the data, Judy. You want me to show it? You want me to show the data?
Okay, let me stop sharing here. Do you want to pull it up and share the data?
Yeah, I'm going to share elementary data, and then if you want to jump in with the high school next, you can. But
okay.
Folks, it doesn't really matter a lot at this point if you're high school, middle, or elementary, as we discussed the data. Also, someone sent in a response that said they weren't a science teacher and had science and weren't a teacher. Don't worry. I think our discussion will help everybody, no matter what level you teach, whether you're a science person or not. Judy, can you see that screen okay?
I can.
Okay, I'm gonna see if I can go to the top.
Can you?
Yeah, so
Can
here's
you
some
get
of the
rid of
elements.
your update X's?
Pardon me?
You've got where it says update, and just hit the X off to the right-hand side.
Updates. I don't see that, Judy.
The top of your shared screen.
Update now, you mean?
Microsoft. Yeah, go over to the side and hit the X at the far right-hand side.
So I can get rid of that. Is it okay? Right here?
Yeah, right there.
Yeah.
And the other one.
No, I can get rid of that too if you like. Okay, you're
Yeah,
right with that?
there, now you've got a little more.
Got a little more
than that.
space. I can give you some more too. This, okay? All right, I'm gonna page it up too. So you can see the brands. A lot of folks use Bounty. I have a 2 there, and that 2 just means they use select a size, and they use 2 select a size, counting as 1 towel. Like the second person there used Bounty and didn't say, I'm hoping they used a regular size, not a select a size. Like the fourth person, I got a 2-1. They had select a size, but I think their data is for just 1 towel. 1, not 2. So we might have to double that. And you can see how much they're saying it absorbed. Most of these are in milliliters and the methods that they used. And what I usually do in class is, now these are anonymous, which is good. So if you see, it's important to pay attention. You're going to see your data possibly if you're elementary. But it's also good to pay attention because I think this is the place where the students learn the most. I could have started out a lecture with the class talking about variables and talking about independent and dependent variables. They had no idea what I was talking about. They would forget about it. And in this, in an experiment, we got one thing we're kind of testing here. What we're trying to find out is absorbency about each towel type. And so the thing that we're testing and finding out, that's our dependent variable. And the thing that was the independent variable in this particular experiment was the thing that we made different on purpose. Now, across the board, we had different kinds of towels. And that's our independent variable. Here's the kind of towel you used. And what we're hoping is at the very end, we can say the amount absorbed, which is our dependent variable, depended upon the kind of towel you used. But it also maybe depends on the method a little bit. So we try to control things so that every paper towel has the same opportunity to soak up the water. And you're going to find out as we go through this discussion that some things might not have been controlled as closely as you'd like. That happens in real science all the time. I can remember times doing oceanographic work when we did an experiment and then we realized there's some things we needed to measure. We didn't maybe measure as good as we should have. There were some variables creeping in that we didn't realize were there. So we had to turn our experiment, our first experiment, into a trial experiment. And that we learned enough from that we could redesign it and come up with even a better experiment that was controlled better. So let's look at our data. You can see the bounties. You see all the different numbers. Now that third one is 58 milliliters. That's a lot for a towel to absorb. And sometimes students realize if one towel can absorb 58 and they only poured 30 into the pan, they go, whoa, maybe we should have poured more into the pan. Now that fourth one, I think that should be 30 because I think that was 1 selector size. That would be double. And you can look at the methods. I usually abbreviate the method on the right a little bit. For example, that very first one poured a teaspoon on the towel until it was wet. They added a teaspoon at a time. They did this twice and they got the exact same number, but they added a teaspoon at a time. Now, one danger there is you got to make a decision, which is kind of a objective decision. If the towel's wet enough, you can keep adding water. Now, you just keep adding water. If it's so wet, there's extra water all over the pan, you're probably good. But if it's so wet that when you pull the towel out, the pan doesn't have a lot of wet water in it, then you should have added some more. But this person didn't say how many they put in, but when they subtracted from what they started with, the difference was 25 milliliters both times. Now the second person, they went ahead and put 250 in a graduated cylinder, and they poured that in a towel. They said until saturated. Again, they're making the decision there, and probably did it in the pan. They poured the excess back into the graduated cylinder, and they subtracted, so they must have had 220 in the graduated cylinder, and they ended up with 30 was the amount that was in the towel. Now, the third group folded. Now, in a minute, I'm going to go back so you can see me. Folding matters. That's why I wrote down half fold. It was times 4. They used select a size. They did 1 fold right in the middle of the perforations, and then they folded quarter folded from there. So it's probably in 16ths. They added 20 milliliters at a time in the pan. And they did that 4 times, so they did 80, poured off the excess. And so they came up with 58, and so on. You see our numbers do vary. And way down, one of the bounties had 3 different answers, and those are in milliliters. But that particular one, notice I have some things in bold. If we were doing this in class, the group would tell me what they did, and I would be abbreviating it on the board. But with that group, it wasn't clear to me, or that person, it wasn't clear to me about the drip. And you'll see a lot of these, like the couple above it, 1 drip for 30 seconds, 1 drip for 60 seconds. This one, I don't know, sometimes they might drip until they stop. One person said they dripped until it was 3 seconds between drips. Another one was 10 seconds. A lot of folks sent in pictures. Now, if I were in class, I could look around the room and see everybody easily. From some of the pictures, I'm not sure the entire towel was wet. So if you're one of those people who laid the towel, draped it across the pan, and poured water in the middle of the towel, and kept pouring water till there was water collecting in the pan below, you probably didn't get the entire towel wet. So the question was, how much will the entire towel hold? So you might want to have to go back and revise what you were doing to make sure you got the entire towel wet, maybe fold it in or something like that. Notice one of the bounties, the one that has 3 numbers. Back to that one, I wasn't sure it was wet. I don't think the whole towel was wet, and I'm not sure they answered the question. The next one, from what 2 things puzzle me. That one has 79 milliliters, looking at that last bounty 2. 79 is a very high number. We do have somebody else said 75 and 70. But most of the other numbers are smaller. When you have an outlier that's either extremely lower than the others or higher, you really want to look at what happened to make sure there's, maybe you can see something that explains why it's higher or lower. Of course, that one they did half fold in the pan, they poured 150, and then they poured off the excess. They let it drip. I wasn't sure how long they let it drip, nor how they poured off the water, but 79 milliliters is a very high number. Now after that, you can see the different kind of towels people used. And we have lots of different ones. We don't really have duplications much, except like only one person used Brawny, but they did test it 3 times. So they got 3 different numbers testing it the same way. Now that should let you see that even though they tried their best to test it the exact same way, look at the differentiation, 52 and a 49, and then a 61. 52 and 49 is pretty close, and the 61 is a lot higher. There's one group that had Hannaford, and they tried 3, and they looked like they had some way to precisely measure milliliters, but theirs were very close together, those 3. So they may have been pretty consistent. And then after that, we have only one Harris Teeter brand. 3 people use Kirkland, Smartly, Target. Great Value, a couple people. Food Lion, and then Sparkle, Dollar General, Walmart, and Liddy. What's neat about Food Lion is they have a regular Food Lion brand and a premium brand. It's nice to test those 2. Now, if you look at most of the numbers, and notice the last few are in tablespoons, so you'd have to multiply each one of those times 15 to convert that to milliliters. But I had a lot of questions about all 4 of those, a lot of questions. So, and 7 tablespoons is a lot more than 2, and 3 and 4, but anyway, plus 7 times 15, that's a pretty good number. That's a very high number for Sparkle. So that's questionable in a way to me. So you see what we have. Now what I would ask the students to do is to draw some conclusions from this. And you can see if we were face to face, and everybody had the same kind of towels, that might be a little easier to compare 3 towels. And we got a lot of Bounty, 3 Brawnies really, and 3 Hannafords, 3 Kirklands. So you might be able to say, and a couple of those Great Values, you might be able to say something about those. So in the chat, you might want to see some people tell what kind of conclusions they can draw from seeing all this data. And Teresa, you can help us by kind of looking at the chat and seeing what people come up with.
Will do. And just a reminder, I did drop the links to those results directly in the chat. So if you want to open those up on your own computer, you can do that to take a look at across the data.
Right. Do you want to show the high school data?
Just one more thing real quick, Judy. And one thing we didn't do in this experiment is I didn't ask everybody to do duplicates of the, to do replication. In a true science experiment, you're going to test the same experiment several times. You aren't going to just depend on one value. But since we had so many people, so many different towels, we did that. Of course, some people were compelled to test it 3 times, and that was good. And we got more data. So anyway, Judy, yeah, let's go ahead and see the.
And wait, before we jump there, there is a clarifying question, Manley, about do you want folks to draw conclusions about the results or the methods, or do you want them to think about both?
Well, both really. I want them to think about what conclusions could you draw from this, and then we're going to talk about methods in just a minute. So let's hold off the methods for just a minute. And after Judy finishes, we're going to come back and talk about what we would do differently next time. So for now, maybe just draw conclusions from the data.
Okay, so to me, it was really interesting because I had the high school and middle school, and you can tell that Manley and I were each taking notes a little bit differently. So I put each person's response together. I didn't divide them up as to what kind of towel they were because I didn't want to have to copy the method multiple times. I had a number of you who found different types of towels that you were able to compare and went into great detail. There were some that wrote this up as a real lab experiment with your procedures, your methods, your materials, why you wanted to do it, what the benefit was, and it was impressive. But we really didn't need for you to, we weren't intending for you to have to work that hard. We thought this would be something pretty easy and fun to do. But I was impressed with some of the results that I got. I even got photographs from some of you showing what it looked like in the different stages. And I couldn't help but think about if you're teaching virtually, this would be great for your students to be able to do the same thing, to be able to actually demonstrate what they did by taking photographs and sending them to you. And looking, we've got, I think the majority of you shop for Bounty as well. Do have a few others, but Bounty is in most of the different ones you did. And again, most of you had it over in milliliters for your results. And again, if you look at the comparison where you did 3, now we have Viva and this one where we had the Viva and the Bounty and the Members Mark. And the Viva and the Bounty were fairly close, and Members Mark really was not that far behind. 3 milliliters is not much when you're talking about water. I got kind of tickled at this response where we had one that the paper towel was Seedling by Grove, and they also did a Bounty. And they added, had the towels in a cookie sheet and were adding 8 tablespoons of water to cover it, then lifting it, letting it drip, and then taking the water that poured out and measuring that to be able to find the absorbency. And the response was, with the Seedling by Grove, I got all my water back, but I know that the towel was wet, but this is my data, so that's what I'm giving you. And as a true scientist, that's what you're supposed to do, is give your true data, but you're giving a qualification of saying, I know that there's an issue here. So I thought that was a good point for you to share with your students, that sometimes you know that your data isn't correct, but it's what you got, but you can give a qualifier saying that you know that somewhere, something happened with this along the way. I did have a couple people that squeezed towels, and when they were measuring that, I had one person that was pretty ingenious about the way they did it, trying to determine exactly how much water was still in the towel, in that they knew how much water they had poured on, and then they squeezed it. Now they measured how much they had not been absorbed, and then they squeezed it to see how much water they had squeezed out. And I'm kind of going, you're defeating the purpose, because we're, again, as Manley was saying, we're talking about how much water the towel actually absorbed. And if you squeeze it, you're actually squeezing out water that the towel absorbed. So that's getting away from the question that's being asked. And I was doing other things, and several of you folded the towel into force. Here's one that the towel was folded twice, so it was in force. And then you lifted it up, and as Manley was saying, depending upon which corner you pick up, it makes a huge difference in how much water is being absorbed. So unless you're consistent about that, your results will vary all over the place between the same towels or different towels. And you may have a towel that's not very absorbent collecting a lot more water than one that is a more absorbent towel, simply because the way you hold it. And Manley, I think you've talked about that a little bit with the open cut.
I'm going to show them that in a minute once we finish this and start talking about what they'll do. Just before we talk about what they'll do next, I want to show them real quick about folding.
Okay, all right. Some of you talked about how long you let it drip. Some of you said to a stopping point. Some of you were saying that you let it go for 10 seconds or 30 seconds or 1 minute. We had several people who use rulers to level out your tablespoon before you put that on top of your water to make sure that you weren't getting the bubble on the tablespoon, that it actually was level. So I thought it was interesting, some of the things that you actually thought about when you were measuring it, since we didn't have your traditional graduated cylinders, to make sure that your measurements were accurate. So Manley, I'm gonna go ahead and pass it over back to you.
Okay, because I want to just show the screen, just me, so they can watch me for a second. Okay. You see me, Judy?
I can see you.
Okay, now a lot of you didn't have a tool like this, a graduated cylinder. There's a plastic one I use with students when I do it face-to-face. Some people did have this, and this is pretty accurate. I noticed, especially in Judy's, that some folks had some kind of balance that could find the mass of the water. Just so happens 1 gram of a cubic centimeter of water is about 1 gram, and a cubic centimeter of water is also 1 milliliter. So that, if you do the grams and just think milliliters, then that's pretty accurate as well. It's hard to be accurate with tablespoons and teaspoons and cups and things like that. That's why we were sliding the water, excess water across the top off of the ruler to try to get as equal measurement every time. Now, let me talk just quickly about folding. Here's a towel. I'll hold it up high. Here's an entire towel. If I'm going to fold it one time like this, and then I'm going to fold it again so that it's quarter folded. And it'd be hard for you to see at home, but I'll turn it this way. Here it is. You see how I'm folding it this way. So if I pick it up by this corner right here, this side's got folds on it, and this side has folds. If it's in the pan wet and I grab this corner and pull it out, I'm going to pull more water out probably than if I take this corner. I'm going to reverse it. If I take it out by this corner, this side is all open. This side right here is all open. And so if I take it out that way, more water drips out quickly, and I'm going to really get a different number. So it does matter. And I'll ask the students, if they say they folded it, put it in the pan, they took it out, I'll ask them, how did you take it out? Some will say, well, we don't know what corner we pulled. Some will say, oh, it was this corner, so they were all open, or maybe it was this corner, so they were all closed. Or if it's one of the other two, one side's folded, one side's open. So you're going to get maybe 3 different amounts of water, plus dripping. And what I usually do on dripping is I let the class discuss it and come up with something. If you let it drip until it stops, you might say, well, that's a more accurate measurement of how much the towel is actually holding. Then I also think if I'm cleaning up spills in the kitchen or at dinner or something, and I got a towel in there, I usually get close to the trash can, pick it up. I don't want it to drip much. I pick it up, move it over. So I'm okay if the class decides to pick it up and put it away right away. Just pick it up and get rid of it right away, or pick it up and let it drip till it stops, or until it's, a few seconds between drips. But they decide, and that's what we're going to talk about now, Judy, if you want to show the next slide.
Okay, I was answering a question.
Okay.
Okay, all right, so I'll put that in there. One of the questions, I'll go ahead and share it because it's a great question. Yeah. And it's one of the things that we tend to get sidetracked on, was discussion on the difference in the sizes of the towels that you use. But the question, if you go back to that, ask how much can one paper towel absorb? And when we're using paper towels, we just tear one off the roll. We don't think about, okay, unless you know you're going to need a lot. And if it's selected size, you may get 2 selected size or 2 paper towels instead of 1. But you're really more interested in how much can that 1 paper towel absorb when you're cleaning up a spill, instead of like, you know, what it is per square inch. And usually when we're looking at absorbency, we are looking at how much can absorb for the amount of the material that we're looking at. But for paper towels, we don't use it that way. We use it 1 paper towel. So when people cut strips so that they are measuring the same amount for each paper towel, that's a different question.
Yeah, if you were asked which paper towel has the most absorbent material, then you'd do all of them the same size. Just a quickie on size, Judy. Scott Towels used to advertise, they had an advertising campaign that they had more towels per roll than any other leading brand. Well, when you measured them, Scott Towels were smallest. So they made them smaller so they could get more on a roll, so they could advertise they gave more. But when you looked at the square footage for the entire roll, Scott actually had less than the other leading brands. So it's really a deceptive ad campaign, trying to make you think you had more. But if you are using individual towels, you would have more individual towels on Scott than the others. By the way, I've done this so many times that when I see a high number for Scott, I'm surprised sometimes, because Scott's usually not as absorbent. Now, Brawny was only used by 1 person, but when I've done this with students and given them Brawny, they really are, they notice that Brawny's larger than all the other towels. So then they want to ask the next question, well, if Brawny weren't larger than Bounty, would it hold as much, you know, would it be as competitive? And so what they do is they cut them the same size, Bounty and Brawny, and they find out usually Bounty will still hold more than Brawny, a little bit more if they're the same size. But since Brawny is a lot larger towel, it can soak up as much as a Bounty in many cases. So size of the towel does matter, but that is a different question. Any other questions that came up, Judy, you want to address?
Let me go ahead and get this back up here.
Okay, in the chat now, if you'll tell us what would you do differently. I don't mean write us an essay, but if there's something in particular you do differently next time, chat now a little bit and tell us what you would do differently. And while the chat's going on, I'll tell you the wrapper, if you kept your wrapper, what I do sometimes is I'll ask the class, you know, of course, in class, they've all had the same towel. So I have maybe 8 groups in my class of 25 students, or 9 groups. And so if I use Bounty and Brawny and Scott, I'd have, you know, 8 different sets of results, you know, and I'd have 8 trials of each of the towels. And so I might take those 8 trials or 9 trials and say, what if you average them? Add them together and divide by how many you had and find an average. And that's our class average for that towel. And then you multiply that times the number of towels in a roll. And when you buy them by the roll. And so one thing to consider is, you know, who gives you a lot of towels in the roll? And so you multiply that by the number of towels in the roll, and you find out how much an entire roll would absorb. Well, then you divide by the cost. And sometimes when you do that, you find out that some of the towels we give less credit to that are less expensive, once you start doing that, you get a lot of absorbency for the penny you spend sometimes, because you do get what you pay for. Those that are very absorbent cost a lot more sometimes. I know I used a brand called Cha-Ching. It's usually 99 cents or less, and it's not really that absorbent. But when another brand costs $2.50 for a roll and Cha-Ching costs 99 cents, okay, they can be somewhat competitive. Okay, what are we getting, Teresa, on the chat now? We should be getting a lot of good chat.
Yeah, we're definitely getting a lot. And you actually just talked about cost, which someone's comment earlier was about cost. There's a lot of comments about measuring the excess water in a different way or more consistently. Mm-hmm. Folding the paper towel and consistently using the same corner of the paper towel. A couple of people are thinking about doing more trials to help better understand the data.
I think they were also discussing about the dripping of the towel, about how long they let it drip.
Good.
And being able to spread the water across the towel.
And what you want to do is have your class discuss these variables and talk about what's the best way to control each one. And the whole idea is they're learning how to design an experiment. Now, you might say when this is all said and done, well, we didn't learn a lot of content with this lab. No, we didn't, but you can learn about independent, dependent variable and how to control other variables so that as they design experiments and as you do experiments in your class, you take other lessons and make them more inquiry-based. You don't have to be the policeman all the time, always telling students what to do and what not to do. They begin to figure out why they should do some things and not do other things, because it will affect the control of the experiment.
There is a specific question in the chat.
I like that last question about the brown paper towel because it is terrible. Whatever's on state contract, whether it doesn't matter what state you're in. You know, that little brown towel we get, as you know, the brown towel we get is not very absorbent. It takes a lot of those to clean up a spill.
There was one interesting question about how do you account for the moisture that's left in the pan? So, and I think that's where you need to try to get materials for, you know, that you're putting the paper towel in that release most of the water instead of it clinging to the sides.
The best idea I found for that, Judy, the best thing we've answered that. I've had classes that answered that before, and they came up with a good answer. My students did. What they do is they wet the pan to start with. They pour water in the pan before we even start, and dump out all the water they can dump out of the pan. They tap the corner of it one or two times, get everything out, and they start. There might be some little specks in there, but then every time they do this, after that, the pan's in the same condition. Otherwise, the very first time you use it, you know, might be different than the last time you use it. So that was not a bad solution.
Right. Any other comments? Okay, so Manley, I'll let you continue.
So as you're walking around your classroom, if you ever go back face to face again, or as you're working with students, here are some questions you can ask them. A lot of times as they're trying to control an experiment or to design it, they might be trying to do something that's maybe not safe, or you don't think it's going to work very well, or they don't think it's going to work very well. So I'm looking at the question kind of in the middle. What could you do instead? What would happen if you tried that? If you tried that, what would happen? And then them knowing why it's important to do that, what obstacles you're going to have to solve. We're going to be thinking about that today as you begin to come up with a plan for an experiment. These are good questions, and you'll think of a lot more. So it's nice to have this list. Have this list handy and look at it. Read this every now and then, and you'll get in the habit of asking better questions. I find that when I observe a lot of classes. In the past, I have observed thousands of classes. And I hear a lot of recall questions. And yes, they got to recall some things. But when I ask my college students that I teach, what did they dislike most about school, is having to memorize a lot of stuff. And you may have been the same way. So these are better questions because these questions get students to think. And we surely want them to think, not just memorize things. So keep this list, use it. I think it will help you. Hope you can add to it. I'm sure you will. What we got next, Judy? So now, think about this, and I guess we could do the chat just briefly, but I'd like for you to think about things you do now. A lesson, you don't get into a long chat, but you might just tell us the name of the activity or the topic of the activity. Think of an activity you do that you could do more inquiry-based, leave it more open and let students solve the problem rather than guiding them to the answer. For example, like doing not pulleys, but
pendulum.
Pendulums, what I was trying to think of. The pendulum, where they're trying to figure out the length of the string is the important variable, and they kind of got to generate the variables. Well, rather than telling them the different things to try, let them think of the different things to try. So let's let you chat for just a minute and tell us if you can think of one or two things you could tell that you do that you could do more inquiry-based this year. You could chat those ideas, and Teresa will collect those. We'll give you about a minute. We can do a lot of chatting in a minute with 46 people. Judy, I'm going as quickly as possible here too.
I know.
Oh, I see. I'm beginning to see some. Good.
Yeah.
That's what we want you to do. That's one of the main points I have for this whole activity, is to get you to think. And let me tell you, if you do this, if you think of 4 or 5 or 10 during the year that you do, I think that science will be a lot more fun for you. and you'll get your students to think more, and it'll be a lot more fun for them. And they'll be better if they do want to do a science fair project. Be easier for them to do because they'll know how to design an activity, a lab, to solve a problem, to answer a question. Teresa, you seeing some jumping out at you? We're going to look at all these chats later, and they can look at the chats as well and see what other people are doing. We're getting a lot of good ones here.
Yeah, there's. I was gonna say, you want me to call some of them out? There, people are talking about.
And they're seeing them. They can see them. Like I do so many with force and motion. Ruth just mentioned force and motion. I do so many open, guided inquiry labs with force and motion. It's just endless what you can do. Somebody's doing slime. Okay. A lot of people mention water and water cycle. Yeah, airplane. A lot of animal behavior things. Oh yeah, they're really coming in now. Yeah. Yeah, that 5th grade force and motion, you can do a lot of open things. Because if we just do labs that are cookbook and they all get the same answer and they're remembering the answer, they might remember that some day in the future, that particular one, but they haven't learned to think and solve a problem themselves, which is going to pay off over and over again. Okay, Judy, we can go on. We'll continue to look at the chat.
Okay. All right. So while that's going on, for the other assignment that you had for today was to send in your topic and your testable question. And I was looking those over, and we got some that are great. We have some that we might want to tweak a little bit along the way, and we're going to discuss some of them and look at some of the things that we might need to look at. And examine and do the tweaking with. But one of the things that I wanted to remind you of is that every good testable question should have in there what the topic is. And I started off with plants, but you can be much more specific when you actually get to creating your testable question. It's what kind of plant or whatever. What's being changed or tested. So that's your variable. And then what are you going to measure? And I think probably where I saw the most issues were when we were looking at what was going to be measured and how were you going to measure it, because there were some things you would have a very difficult time measuring that I saw. So that's something you need to think about. If you're looking at working with your students and helping guide them in developing a project that they're going to be doing that they might want to take beyond your classroom for it to go to a competition, things that they need to consider, is this unique? If everybody already knows the answer to it, then maybe they need to think of something that's a little bit more unique, that's not already out there for everybody to be. So, well, I already know that one. Going back to my strawberry DNA lab. And then also you want to find out, is this a project that can be done by a student? Can you get these materials? Do you need a scientist or an engineer to help you with it? Do you need to be able to use facilities in a research lab? And if you do, is that something that would be available to you? So those are things when you're helping your students develop those testable questions, you need to go beyond the topic, what's being changed or measured, and to look at these things as well. So going forward a little bit, these are some of the sample questions. And I see a question, does it always need to be quantified or qualitative observations be accepted? And I'll go back to that one. Let me go, I clicked it too many times. Star had asked about what's being measured. Can you use qualitative observations? The issues with qualitative observations is they don't stand up to continued testing often. Now, if it's something that, especially if it's qualitative, like people's opinions, or if you observe that this is happening with an animal for this respect, and we have lots of qualitative data that comes in for human experiments and animal experiments, but it's really hard to say, is this really happening, or is this just an answer that you want or that somebody thinks that you want? So that can be an issue. So if you can get quantifiable data, it's much, much better. So looking at this first question, I pulled a couple of questions that y'all had done and then threw in a couple myself. So the first question, they're looking at rooftop gardens, reducing the temperature of buildings. And if you're looking at this, I've got my chat windows covering up my questions. So I may have to close that for a second. All right, so does a rooftop garden reduce the temperature inside of a building? And looking at that, your topic would be you're looking at rooftop gardens. You're interested in rooftop gardens. And you're looking at seeing if they actually cause cooling in a building. So what you want to do is measure the temperature, but that may be difficult to do when you're thinking about, are you going to have access to buildings that you can put rooftop gardens on, or do you already have one? Or are you going to create one in your backyard? So when you get developing the research plan for that would say whether or not that would be something that would be doable. The other thing is, in order to be considered significant, how much of a temperature change would you want to have? So in looking at those variables, deciding on that would help you decide whether or not that's a question that you can actually do. So the next question,
Judy, on that one, this is Manny. On that one, you'd almost want to make sure that you had buildings that were the same, like the whole rest of the building was the same.
Exactly.
The same size, the same exterior, measuring the same place, and none of the buildings can have a heating or air conditioning system working, because that's going to pile up the whole thing. So you got to have vacant buildings pretty much.
Right, and you've got to have the same kind of plants.
So that's almost an engineering.
The same amount of dirt. You have to be watering them exactly the same.
Right. So you might build some buildings. I mean, some simple buildings, do some models.
Yeah, I was going to say in the chat, they're asking about models. Is this a good option for a model?
Yeah, you could do modeling.
And I think that would be your best bet, is to actually build models.
This would be an engineering
making sure that they are side by side enough so they would have the same amount of sunlight. They would have the same amount of rain. You could water them the same way. You could have the same color kind of plants, the same dirt, the same thickness of the dirt. There are lots and lots of variables in there that you would have to be able to test and you would need to have more than one building with a rooftop garden, and probably more than one that's your control. So,
but the control's the question, because on your control, are you going to have a metal roof, which you might want to have one of metal? Are you going to have, and what color is it going to be? Are you going to have a shingled roof, or is it going to be tar up there, on the roof? Or is it going to be a roof that's painted white, or whatever? So that control that you're using is going to be really, important.
Exactly, because if you have a control with a white roof, it's not going to absorb heat. If you have a control with a dark roof, it absorbs the heat.
Yeah.
So,
okay, so I just want to let you both know that we've got about 7 minutes before this session.
Oh my goodness.
So we're going to have to
Go ahead, Judy.
All right. So I'm going to go down to the bottom one, because this is when you're looking at, this is one of those subjective questions. And we get so many things like we're going to play music and it's going to change a person's mood, that students send in, and that listening to soothing music, the person states that their mood is better. Well, yes, studies have shown that does that, but does it happen in like 5 minutes? No, not really. And then again, it's one of those things that's very difficult to test. Looking at different colors is one that I see as well as changing a person's mood. So you have to be careful about how accurate your data really is as to whether or not this is happening. Plus, you get into the issues that even though does not look like this could be at all harmful, you are still working with humans. And so if you work with humans, or you work with animals, or you work with potential hazardous materials, you know right off the bat that you're going to have special permissions to be able to do it. Even if you're just asking them if this changes their mood, you still have to have permission to be able to work with humans. You would want to work with someone over 18, because if you work with minors, the parents are going to have to say, okay. So anyway, moving forward. We're not going to go to the breakout rooms. We're not going to give you a chance to really look at these questions the way we hoped. But when you are looking at these questions, I want you to go back and look at your question that you sent in to see, do I have my topic in there? Do I have that variable that is going to be changed in my testable question? And do I have, how am I going to measure that change? So if I'm measuring temperature, that's how I'm measuring it. If I'm measuring the force of something, then I'm going to talk about how strong it is and being able, or the pressure that's actually exerted against it. But looking, how am I going to measure this change to see what's actually happening? I say again, the most common problem is getting that measurement in there. And you may want to look at some of the questions that were sent in and see which ones you think that might need to be changed in order to be able to be a better question, to be tweaked a little bit, because everybody's got great ideas, but sometimes they just need to be tweaked a little bit.
Judy, can we go back to the questions for just a second? I'll be real quick. Can we go back to the questions for just a second that we had?
All right, how many minutes do we have? Okay,
I don't know.
We got 4 minutes.
Well, yeah, all right, I'll do this in 1 minute if we can get back to it.
Okay. Those?
Okay. All right, they're measuring different colors and affecting the person's mood. That last thing you were just talking about. So the person's mood is going to be the thing that would be measured, although this is a hard one to do. The person's mood is going to be the dependent variable, and the different colors are going to be the independent variable. That's what I talked about before. Changing the dog food on the second one, is going to be the independent variable, and then the change in mannerisms is going to be the dependent. Again, mannerisms will be hard to measure, and then what method of growing the tomato plants work best, and they're going to be measuring growth is going to be the dependent variable, but the independent variable is going to be the method they use. So all those questions should have the independent and the dependent variable, the thing that you're going to be changing, like you said, and then the thing that's going to be measured. All those should be in the questions. And the thing that's going to be measured, it may not, like that second one doesn't tell you how they're going to measure it, but we need to realize that's tough to measure, just like person's mood is tough to measure. Okay, I'm done. That's good.
Okay, all right, move onward.
Sorry.
All right, so this is important enough that we went ahead and gave it to you, even though it is on Science Buddies. It gives you examples of things not to let your students do projects on. And this gets the effect of colored light on plants. Okay, we get that all the time. We know that. Effective music or talking to plants. How do you really measure that? Then you've got some of the others. Some that I wanted to point out are there at the bottom. And these are things that really you cannot do that students think about. And the one of collecting tissue samples from living animals or vertebrate animals, that violates all the rules for the Science and Engineering Fair. If you go to the International Science and Engineering Fair rules, a student can use tissue that has been collected for another purpose, like if they're working at a research lab somewhere at a university, and a faculty member or graduate students during a project, and they have sacrificed animals for their research. A student can use leftover tissues, but an animal cannot be sacrificed for their research. They cannot euthanize an animal. They would be disqualified. And if you are doing predator-prey activities, are also disqualified, because that means that you're going to have one animal killing another one. And you also, if you're looking at doing an experiment with animals, even if it's just goldfish, I could never do a project with goldfish, because no matter what, I can have a saltwater aquarium and it does just fine, but I can't raise goldfish. If more than a certain percentage of the animals die, you have to immediately suspend your research and stop it. So you need to be looking at those kinds of things. Anything that is illegal, they can't use. I did not know that you cannot pump gas if you are not of the age to be able to drive a car.
Yeah.
And I found that out because we had a project, a student was pumping gas, and I've forgotten what it was beyond that, but they were not 16, so they could not legally pump gas, so we couldn't let them do that project.
Elementary people, you cannot grow bacteria or germs or microorganisms. You can't
Right,
go off
elementary.
measurement.
Yes, elementary people, you cannot do it. You can use yeast. Yeast is fine, but you cannot intentionally grow microorganisms. No one can grow microorganisms at home. So if you have students that are doing work at home, this could potentially be a big issue. They can grow something, they can streak a plate and bring it into school, and that is acceptable. They cannot grow it at home.
All right, Judy, so I think that is our time. I think this is actually a good breaking point in the slides too.
Yep.
So if we want to pause here and give folks a break, does that work?
That works.
Okay. And so folks that are on, if you want to open up those topic questions, I did put those in the chat. We will give you 5 minutes and we will jump into the other session. And there is a question that Manley and Judy, you might be able to address as we open the other session about how with 30 kids in a class, how do you get them to find a topic that's creative and doable? So that feasible question when you have 30 kids. So we will, for those of you who have opened those up, I will send those links. Yes, Star. I will be sending all of those PDFs in the follow-up email too, but if you want them open now, and I can also drop them into the chat when we open the next session. So give us 5 minutes, take a restroom break, and we will jump into the next room.
Judy, how many slides do we have left in 3?
I'll stop it and see.
5?
Yeah, can you pick up there on the next one, Judy, and we'll just start there?
Right, that's what I was gonna do.
Okay, that sounds good. Thank you.
All right, thanks,
I'm gonna leave
folks.
now.
Yep.